Yeah, I can take this from you. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. So it requires 2 touches to turn it.
Love that.
So it goes for the extents of that from the screen there to the extent of that podium.
Awesome.
So,
Okay, thank you. When I was 19, I stood on top of a bridge overlooking an overpass with an empty handle of vodka in my left hand, half an 8-ball in my right pocket, and 3 oxys flowing through my system as I was about to jump into an incoming flow of cars underneath me. I had been thinking about for the last 3 months it was time to kill myself. And there was a cold, aching pull inside me that was demanding that I jump into the incoming traffic on I-81 in Southwest Virginia. I didn't know at the time that I was at the heart of the opioid epidemic and that I was just one of many struggling with the addiction I'd fallen into. What was even more confusing was that there were so many voices going on while I was standing there, feeling the breeze of these cars going 80 miles an hour beneath me. See, there was a shouting telling me to jump, that I didn't deserve to live, that it was pointless, that life was always going to be this way. And there was a whisper asking me a question. Who are you? And I didn't have an answer. And so I stepped back and I climbed back over the gate and I threw the empty bottle of vodka that I didn't need and I walked home. And I flushed the rest of the Coke down the toilet, and I looked at myself in the mirror. And I decided I was going to try to answer that question first. And then I went through a few months of hell. Anyone in here ever really struggled with sleep? Maybe go multiple nights not being able to sleep? There's nothing quite as treacherous as going multiple nights without any sleep. Every aspect of your body and mind starts to sort of lose touch with itself. So for about 6 months, I slept for 15-minute increments and then would wake up in a full panic attack. See, the thing about opiate addiction is it messes with your oxytocin dynamics in your body. Oxytocin is the chemical that gets released when cuddling or when a baby's breastfeeding to form attachment with their mothers or during sex. It's about bonding and calm. When you go, little oxytocin gets to surge in your nervous system. But opiates bind to your oxytocin receptors. So when you do a whole lot of opiates, suddenly your body says, oh, I don't need to produce oxytocin anymore, which means you can't actually physically access calm. And so I had to learn how to live in a panic attack. That even when falling asleep, it's not that I was sort of going into this serotonin experience. It was really just exhaustion. My body just couldn't keep flooding with the level of cortisol that it had, and so it would give me a little 15-minute break. And I had to learn how to live with that. And then I would spend my days on my iPhone 1 scrolling, looking for answers. I was really sure this was a physical problem. I just needed to get my nutrition right, and I needed to get my exercise regimen right, that I had caused this physically. It surely had a physical solution. And I was totally lost. Nothing felt real. And so I didn't have any shame, really, about just showing up to random doctors' offices or calling random authors. I would ask anyone for answers that I thought I might be able to talk to. How could I fix this? And eventually, after months, I sat up in my bed in my parents' house, who I had moved back into, and I wondered, it's like, am I going to kill myself? And the answer was no. Not because I really had any hope for what I thought my life was going to become, but I thought about my mom and how much she was trying to love me. I never really felt loved by her, which actually just deepened my sense of shame and brokenness because I could see how much she tried. But the idea of strapping someone who was trying so hard to love me with grief for the rest of their life was something I just couldn't move past. Which then left me with a bigger predicament. Okay, if I'm going to stay here, what the hell do I do with this life? Because spending 24/7 of my waking hours hunting down answers, trying to figure out how to find comfort, isn't working. The more that I'm looking, the less that I'm finding. And so what if I, from now on, just assume I'm never going to be comfortable again? What would still be worth doing with my life? And that's when I unlocked a core dimension of well-being that had never been really thoroughly explained to me. Purpose. See, there I sat and I thought about, well, you know, I worked with kids for like when I was 14 to 19. I was really good at that. And I was studying philosophy in college, mostly because I was good at arguing. And they didn't make you take tests. They would just grade you on arguments, which I loved. And I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to fix the education system. Because I figured the whole problem with the education system was just that I wasn't working on it. And so I unlocked a sense of purpose. Now, I still didn't learn how to relate with anything in my inner world, but now suddenly all of that anxious energy had somewhere to be directed towards other than just chasing down comfort. So what the hell does any of this story have to do with cybersecurity or AI or trust? I'm so glad that you asked. See, there's a crisis in our world that we are failing to wrap language around. And my attempt is to hand us some of that language. Over the last few centuries, there has been waves of innovation with technology that have been astounding. And that innovation has not just been increasing, but it's been exponentially increasing, to the point where the people who lived 200 years ago lived lives more similar to people that lived 1,000 years ago than us. Average life expectancy was 37. Infant mortality was through the roof. They couldn't imagine the sort of lives that we live. And so what happens to a group of people who socioculturally cannot evolve to keep pace with the rate of technological innovation? Until about the 1970s, 1980s, for all of human existence, we had a limit to the amount of content that we could consume. Even the richest people in the world in the 1800s, they would walk into their homes, they might have the greatest book collection in the entire world, and eventually, in their lifetime, they could read them all. There was a limit. Now, you pick one genre, call it Italian food, you could spend the rest of your life consuming every piece of content possible, and you would never reach the bottom. So that started to shift really in the 80s with the just explosion of television programming, and then the surge of the internet. And then in the 90s, this weird thing happened really with the O.J. Simpson trial, which is the explosion of the 24-hour news cycle. We had this technology that now is weaponized to transform the way that we consumed information. Instead of having structure to it, which was we consume news in the morning and we consume news in the evening, and we have high standards for who's delivering that news, and we really respect that as an institution. Instead, that started to transform. Now news was everywhere, all the time. And then when 9/11 came along, suddenly it felt like it was urgent that we needed to be watching everywhere all the time. And collectively, we adopted a new behavior that we never dropped, which social media then came along and hijacked and rode right on top of. And so what has happened is we now operate with this continuous partial attention at all times because of the way that we relate with technology and information, and the way that has transformed the way we relate to ourselves and each other. That has disastrous causes. We talked about purpose. I'm going to break down 6 dimensions of biopsychosocial spiritual well-being. What does a person need in order to live a full life? One is purpose, and that comes from our need for autonomy. For over 97% of the time Homo sapiens sapiens were on this planet, we existed as hunter-gatherer nomads. And so we're wired to seek out new lands, new sexual partners, new food, and we need to have a sense of power and agency over ourselves. And so autonomy is this need that we have. Defining your values, knowing what matters to you, unlocks this opportunity where you can always be making more progress toward what you want. If you don't know what matters to you, then your sense of autonomy can never really grow because your belief that you can get what you want doesn't grow because you don't know what you want. That's the magic of defining purpose. But that's not our core driver. It's not our core need. Anyone in here ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Just keep your hands up for just a second. Let me describe it to a few folks, see if we can get some more hands up. It's that triangle. It's got like different colors. You know, food is at the bottom and love and belonging is nice and in the middle. Yeah, you know, job satisfaction and money is right there above food, below love and belonging. Just checking, does that match up with how you guys think about your lives? It's like, I need food, I need money, and then I'll think about love in my life. Is that how much you attend to things? Yeah, so would it surprise you to know that Abraham Maslow, a distinguished psychologist both in his time and historically, never made a hierarchy? That was after his death, a few organizational psychologists who became consultants made some graphics and simplified some of his ideas. The hierarchy is wrong, it's a myth. The thing that makes us unique, the reason that we've come to dominate the planet, is because of the way that we are able to communicate and collaborate together. One person doesn't stand a chance against a lion, tiger, or bear, but 10 might and 100 certainly do. And so our core drive is connection. Why else would you have stories like people in the Holocaust who gave up food for others so that they would starve? If food was your primary driver, why would you give food to somebody else while you die? Doesn't quite add up. You've got those stories of the Romanian orphanages in the 80s and 90s where they were overrun with children. And so they just didn't get enough touch. They got enough food, they got enough water, the temperature in the shelter was fine, and yet they died because they didn't get the touch that they needed from another human being to develop their stress regulation capacities within their body. There's a term I use called the relational regulation matrix. If you've ever thought about your spheres of influence, then you know what this is. So you could think about, the people in your life that are most essential for shaping who you are and supporting who you are. And so right at the core, there's you. And then you've got those people. And so your identity is held by those relationships. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. If suddenly all of those people vanished, your identity would feel very odd and it would need redefining. It's like when a core person in your life dies or you go through a breakup. It feels like a huge identity shift because it is, because a place where that identity was tethered is gone. And so then outside you have these other folks that you're sort of related to, might be, work people or somebody that you see regularly at the grocery store, and then you have folks out here. I'm a behavior scientist. I'm a licensed therapist. I did that for over a decade. Then I started training other therapists and started working with educators. While I was going around working with educators, particularly in schools with the most challenging children, helping them transform their entire behavior management practices, and training therapists in modern behavior science, my best friends were all managers of tech teams, sales teams, and they would call me whenever they had a problem. And I was like, what kind of training did you guys get? And they were like, what do you mean training? And so then I started working with organizations. And the way that I describe when I would walk into workplaces is the same that I would describe when I would walk into modern schools, which is how I would imagine a surgeon would feel if we sent them back in time 200 years ago and saw people doing surgery without washing their hands. We don't have a knowledge gap problem, we have an implementation gap problem. I went to Finland when I was in grad school to take a look at their education system because they have been consistently in the top 2 for the last 20 years, which is shocking since they were consistently bottom of the barrel in the 80s. And their minister of education, I asked them, what do you think, what is the big turnaround? He said, it's really simple, actually. There's this one amazing country that funds 90% of the education research, and they they complete most of the education research. And what we did is we read it, and we implemented it into how we shape our systems. That country was us, the United States. We're not lacking answers when it comes to How do we build systems that effectively teach people skills, that effectively help people learn, that effectively help people change behaviors? The problem is we've not designed systems that teach these skills. Okay, so then what are we supposed to do with this? Well, we've learned two core dimensions and drives so far. Autonomy, so we need to cultivate purpose. Connection, so we need to cultivate belonging. Anyone heard of the over 100-year Harvard longitudinal study on health and happiness? Amazing, you guys are gonna love this. So longest standing study ever completed. It's had 3 different directors. They've gone through 4 generations where they asked a question in the early 1930s. What is the greatest determinant of health and success? And so they had these people. They would survey, they would come in and interview, they would track all of their doctor's visits for their entire lives. And the greatest predictor of health span, longevity, and happiness throughout their life, it wasn't how rarely they smoked, how often they exercised, how often they drank, or how much money they made. It was the quality of their relationships. Dr. Bruce Perry, one of the top trauma researchers in the world, asked a similar question, which is, what's the greatest predictor of someone being resilient after trauma as opposed to someone going through cycles of addiction, disorder, and despair after trauma? Greatest predictor? Having one high-quality relationship. The greatest predictor of resilience is relationship. The greatest predictor of fulfillment, health, happiness, quality of relationships. The magic is, it doesn't take 10. One high-quality relationship. So I define belonging as, I believe I am seen, heard, and valued somewhere by someone. So, how is that different than what's currently happening in our systems? The truth is, go in with that knowledge, like I did after traveling all over the world, becoming a highly trained behavior scientist, and sit in a modern public school. What you'll see are teachers who receive no classes about psychology or lectures about emotional intelligence or stress regulation. I know because I've been part of study groups that have surveyed and analyzed teacher training programs throughout California, Virginia, North Carolina, and New York. You know how many we found that had a specific lecture on mental health? Not a class, a lecture, mental health, emotional intelligence, or stress regulation out of those 3 states? 0. And so, what is a teacher's primary job with a room full of 20 human beings? Is it to be a master of lesson planning, or is it perhaps to be able to know how do you create the environments in which those children could be open to learning? They don't learn anything about nervous systems. How are they going to know how to regulate nervous systems? And so what happens in our schools is these teachers who have children who have walked in with less emotionally available adults who have been more and more stressed because of the way that technology has changed through the last few decades and the transformations in the home. Since those children are now walking in with less skills and greater stress, the demands on those teachers have been going up while the resources that they're given have been going down. So you really can't blame them. They're not given the training or the resources, and the kids that are walking in are more and more difficult. And yet what you'll find that they do is they weaponize stress activation. So stress comes in different waves. Stress is a good thing. If we walk outside and we're in the middle of the road and a car starts coming, I hope that you get stressed so that you move. Stress is just this. I'm stressing this table. The problem with stress is when it lasts too long or it's too much. So chronic stress or traumatic stress. So here's my comfort zone. Here's my challenge zone. Here's my crisis zone, my overwhelm zone, trauma zone. What happens is when I go into crisis, I'm in fight or flight. Now when I go into overwhelm, I'm in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. We're lucky that the majority of our children's stress response is to fawn and to people please. But then is it any wonder how I then, as a therapist, worked with thousands of people in their 30s and 40s who would tell me the same story? I've built the big, bright, shiny life. I followed the rules that they told me. I got the good grades, I got the good job, and yet my life feels hollow. Well, of course it does, because you went through a system that was built to teach you to suppress what you felt on the inside in favor of doing what the person with the most power in the room wants you to do. Any women in the room see other problems with that kind of dynamic? Suddenly, when you just look at the way that we teach and the way that we set up systems of learning, you can see all of the challenges with our society playing out, because the myths of how we think we change behavior are webbed and embedded within them. And so the way that we change this is starting with understanding our core need is belonging. And so when you understand that, then suddenly you can start to teach people how to relate with things like their emotions. Sensation is another core need. So our third one within this 6-piece well-being dimension. And so sensation, we are always looking for data. We perceive so much more data than we could even talk about. And so we're these sensory creatures that are always trying to see what is going on in this world that we are relating to. And so in order to cultivate that, we have to embody emotional experiences. Emotions happen within the body. When we don't feel and process them, they get stored in the body as trauma, still takes up energy, except now it's going to have disastrous causes. There's not an emotion on the planet that somebody somewhere doesn't pay to experience. In the body, when they run the studies, it takes about 90 seconds to really process an emotion. The thing about emotional regulation skills is that they don't develop inherently. They're learned through relationship. How do my parents relate to my emotions? Then I learn to then parent my emotions in that way. And so we have to teach these specific skills. Problem is, and this will be shocking to no one in this room, in the last few years, we've seen a huge decline in these emotional regulation and in social skills as these kids are going through school. Why? Well, the adults are more stressed. As the technology has changed, instead of having closed work hours 9 to 5, they can be available anytime for work. Instead of being at home and then being present with their kids, they're stressed and now they want a distraction, and so they're on their screens. We have less emotionally available adults, so they're not having as many interactions with their children, helping them attune and learn emotional regulation skills, right? And so those children have more stress, they're not learning those skills, and then all of a sudden you have something like COVID come through and happen, where now there's just a huge break, where kids aren't even having the interactions with their peers. I talked to a CRO who we're working with our company right now. They're a pilot customer of ours. And he said, honestly, me and all my friends in like our group chat, a whole bunch of other CROs up in New York, we agreed that anyone from 2017 to 2022, we're not hiring. Because as a sales team, they just aren't going to have the skills that we're going to have. So it's just an easier shortcut for us. Panache Desai is the minister of the School of Economics, the London School of Business. He has this great line, which is, in the past, jobs were about muscles. And these days, jobs are about the brains, but in the future, jobs are going to be about the heart. See, we have a massive content distribution problem. We are overwhelmed because we have lost any sense of structure for how we're supposed to relate with information. And so innovation through the last century has been about speed, scale, and scope of information sharing, which is wonderful. We have the internet, we have smartphones, we have social media. Great, but it's not enough anymore to just focus on speed and scale. Now the question is, how are we going to organize all of this information in a way from a design standpoint so that the quality of life is actually going in the direction that we want? Because just driving up engagement on platforms does not create well-being. And one of the risks happening within the AI wave right now is you go to many of these conferences and you'll hear the same swan song that you heard in the 90s and the early 2000s, which is this technology is going to save us. We're going to increase the speed and scale of information sharing, and then that's going to create some free time for people. And guess what? People are going to use their free time to increase their well-being. Let's take a look at the data. Has that happened? Depression is now the leading cause of disability worldwide. For the first time in 150 years, 25-year-olds are expected to die sooner than their grandparents did. 30-year-olds are expected to make less money than their parents. Did software come along and magically give us the freedom and fulfillment and health that it was promised? No, let's not fall for it again. Now, here's the problem with that. That doesn't happen magically. Systems do what the incentives incentivize them to do. And incentives are shaped by those that hold them accountable. So what happens, though, when the majority of people are too overwhelmed to coordinate together to hold the most powerful companies in the world accountable? Does that sound like an exciting, optimistic story that's going to unfold? Of course not. And so we're at a crucial moment in time where what we need now are groups of people that can come together. Why? Because when things are too overwhelming for us as individuals, we have a relational regulation matrix, which means our window of tolerance, the scale and scope for stress that we can hold, expands and deepens with the quality of relationships that we have access to. And so by empowering people from the bottom up to create more powerful cultures within their organizations and within their teams, we unlock greater capacity for co-regulation and stress regulation. So instead of avoiding conversations about gun violence or mental health or healthcare transformation from a policy standpoint, because we're just like, that's just a lot. It's so big. Instead, we can actually tackle some of those things. And arguably, the greatest policy question of our age is now upon us, which is, how are we going to create standards and accountability practices for AI? We're going to need groups of people to come together so that we can actually make sense of things. Another core need for our biopsychosocial spiritual well-being, coherence. Our mind is always trying to create story about what is going on. And so we have to cultivate insight in order to be able to have coherence of our experience. We also need to be able to orient to where and when we are. That's another need. So we have to be able to cultivate mindfulness. This is how we have power in relationship to the overwhelm of information all around us. Being able to pay attention to the present moment in a particular way, on purpose, non-judgmentally. Practicing that as a skill, I've taught children who are 4 years old and on the autism spectrum. I've taught 83-year-olds with dementia. So anyone in between, whether it's 12-year-olds with ADHD or addicts on their first day of withdrawal, we can all practice and develop the skill for being able to direct our own attention. That's crucial because these systems that we have to design that create more co-regulation with one another can't exist without leaders. Because a system doesn't exist without someone choosing to take responsibility for it. We have a crisis of leadership and responsibility because we're all so overwhelmed. For the first time in the last 5 years, compared with the 30 years before, when you survey 20 to 24-year-olds and you ask them would they like to be in a leadership position in the next 10 years, we're starting to see that percentage go down because it's just like a lot. Because again, when you're overwhelmed, you don't want more on your plate. We have an overwhelm problem. So we need leaders who can create groups that then can restore trust within those groups. Since the Nixon years, trust in institutions has been going down and to the right. Meanwhile, our GDP is still skyrocketing, along with depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, addiction, overdose, mass shootings. So at some point, we have to demand that the resources that we are a part of gaining within this country get reallocated in ways that actually enhance our well-being. At some point, we have to hold accountable the most powerful companies the planet has ever seen to actually design their technologies in a way that enhance well-being, not just drive engagement. And the only way we do that is each of us deciding to take a little bit more responsibility over the people directly in our lives that we can connect with and the cultures of the teams and organizations that we are part of shaping. Last need is for accomplishment. We have this need for mastery and progress, so we have to cultivate accomplishment. Accomplishment is a Latin word. It's ad cumplere. which means with trust. So building trust within yourself is confidence, confidere. It's with trust. And so by picking things that matter to you and making progress towards them, you expand your platform for what is possible. By deepening trust in the relationships that are most important to you, you deepen your window of tolerance and can accomplish more. And as you start to then cultivate those 6 dimensions in your own life, you can choose to step up and do what somebody who has extra capacity can do, which is take responsibility for more stuff. And so whether it's a family, a classroom, your business team, your business, or a city, or a state, or a country, it breaks down to 3 pieces. You want to have what I call an empowered culture. Those 6 dimensions are what I call the empowered well-being model. You want to have an empowered culture, which is one that generates value for an organization while helping people to become more and more of themselves as opposed to less and less of themselves. A regenerative culture that cares about sustainability, not just speed and short-term results. 3 pieces. 1, purpose. Are you able to communicate what you do here and why you do it, and do you know why the people who are here with you are here for that? Do you know the people that work for you? Why are they here? Genuinely. What connects them to the beacon that drives your business? And if you don't know that, you are not utilizing your resources efficiently enough. Because with spending nothing, you can unlock greater performance from them. Because now you get to connect the story of who they are more to the story of what you're doing. And nothing is more motivating than actually trying to meet the standards of who we think we are. So you want that to exist in your business. Purpose. 2 is processes. Are you able to create processes that optimize progress and regeneration? It doesn't do you any good if you convince everyone in your business or your team to drive their car with the foot against the accelerator. When it's time to go fast, you got to go fast. And when you don't need to go fast, you have to put systems in place that allow people to recover. Otherwise, they will trust you less because they see you as the leader, as responsible for making sure they can live, not just so they can make you money. Processes. The 3rd is people. You have to have people skills, and that breaks down into trust. You want to get even more granular? It breaks down into 7 behaviors. Brene Brown's research on trust, braving, boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, generosity. That creates trust. Those are skills, those are behaviors you can practice in micro moments when interacting with people and in macro moments. You enhance trust, then suddenly people have more capacity, they can be vulnerable, they can be creative, they can take risks. You have those processes, people will actually stay there. You can promote within, it'll be more cost effective. They'll actually take more ownership of the culture, less work for you as the leader, and they'll actually be able to communicate to you why they're there. You can unlock greater motivation, overall better for your entire organization. What we're doing is we've raised $2 million and we're building an AI manager copilot that takes notes from your one-on-one calls that managers have and give them feedback. The way that a Whoop band does about strain score for your physical exertion, we're trying to create conversational intelligence to try to give a little bit of feedback on how are you actually managing your teams? How are you impacting people? And what drives each of them? What skills do you most need to be developing based on what your business is doing and psychographically who you are? Because like has already been said, we need solutions that are automated, continuous, and data-driven. Thoughts, questions? Please.
How the hell did you get into this room?
Charles.
Fantastic.
So what I do is,
I thought this was just a whole bunch of geeky people. This is amazing.
do I sound like a non-geeky person to you? You hear this, the obsession in my voice? I'm with you guys.
Charles, amazing. Amazing. Thank you.
Please.
How do we continue the conversation and participate in this leadership movement?
Yeah, so this is the Empowered Leadership Movement.
Yeah.
So one, get in contact with me. LinkedIn, we have a podcast, we have a community called Work 4.0. The idea is Work 1.0 is agrarian, Work 2.0 industrial, Work 3.0 is digital. We are now in the time of transition. We're sort of lost. We don't know exactly what's coming next. So the Work 4.0 is a question. where we talk with all of the greatest minds that we can find that are innovating the future of work, whether they are researchers, operators, investors, and we ask them, like, what do you think it's going to be? What do you think we need? And so we want as many people to be a part of that community as possible. We have a deep partnership network. Ultimately, I'm working with corporations because I got beat up trying to change all of our schools. Ultimately, we need to transform the way that our education system is structured, but the education system is too embedded in inertia and bureaucracy that the real money for building a new system that makes the old system outdated is going into places like tech companies and showing them that you can retain your employees and develop skills faster that are better for everybody. And the systems we build, we can then turn around and show the education system and say, look, we told you so. And so anyone that's interested in building teams, companies, whether they become a customer of ours at all, we want to be connected. We want to help.
So one more thing on that.
Please.
One of our portfolio companies is a travel app, which actually helps like local or international travel, which the theme is leveraging AI to allow humans to experience nature.
Beautiful.
So what I'm trying to do with that message is we, even though it's a travel app, we're the guide.
Cool.
And the humans are the heroes to their own story.
Cool.
So every hero needs a guide no matter what.
Sure.
So that's what we're trying to position ourselves that way. And I haven't heard anybody echo those things until you did just now, which is really cool. That's why I want to push it a little further. And we have an event, Entrepreneur Week, where we're kind of exposing this a little bit.
Cool.
And so the way I'm kind of showing it is like, yeah, we're going to leverage AI to gain time, efficiency, right? So this efficiency, if humans, us, little heroes, don't capture that time, it's just sitting there ripe for corporatism to take it.
Right.
So if you don't leverage your time and understand, it's very important, very valuable to me, and I leverage technology to gain time. So now it's going to mental health, it's going to wellness, it's going to experience, culture, da 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 da.
100%.
So if humans don't speak up and make that a thing, then they're going to lose it.
I might challenge you even further.
Yeah.
Which is, I go as far as to challenge the line of thinking that technology's job is to create free time for us. When you look throughout history, when we have a technological innovation, that's usually the story that we start saying is like, look at this washing machine. You're gonna get this washing machine, and now you don't have to spend any time out there in that hot tub of water heating it up. Like, you can now throw it in here. We always talk about it as a time saver, when really it's a life changer. And so it's not about thinking, okay, we're going to open up this free time. How is it going to get captured and utilized? We're now changing how we're living. And so the question is, how are you going to embed this into your life and not just have it seep into the behavioral habits that you already have and the behavioral patterns that the biggest companies in the world are incentivized to push you toward? The question is, like, what kind of systems are you going to build for yourself and for whoever's in your life to actually utilize that technology to help you shift your behaviors toward the place that you want them to go? And that takes conversation, and it takes reflection, and it's uncomfortable, and it's hard, and it takes people doing it together. So, and it takes guides.
Yeah, we're the guys. Corporations, so we did a lot of PR research, like Edward Bernays' days, kind
Cool.
of stuff, right? And so the corporations actually have specific times, twice a month, where they sit around and they strategize and they're like, how might we leverage this, like squeeze society for this, make more money, more profit.
Sure.
So they are having those discussions, and I know that because
Right.
we came from that world.
Right.
I'm like, all right, society needs to do this too. So then we're
Right.
moving out. Yeah.
So there's this amazing study that was done on dopamine. So and this is related to what you're talking about. I swear, I'm not just going on a tangent. I'm going to land this plane. So dopamine, they thought for a while it was about reward. It's like you go to the gym and then you feel a sense of accomplishment, so you get a rush of dopamine. And so they did this study. They took these monkeys, they put them in these cages, and the idea was that food would come out after there was this light that went on, they pressed a lever, food would come out. And they thought the dopamine surge would be at the highest when the food came out, because dopamine was about reward, but it didn't. The dopamine surge came when the light went on, because the light told them to press the lever, because dopamine is fuel for action, not reward, because driving to the airport is the most exciting part of the vacation. And so what's interesting about for these monkeys, though, is the light would go on, dopamine would surge, they would press down the lever, and then they would get the food. Great, except if you locked the lever. So light goes on, lock the lever, food doesn't come out, okay. Light goes on, lock the lever, dopamine stops coming. So you have to be able to trust that you can make progress in something in order to make effort toward it. And so, of course, corporations are having conversations about how can we weaponize what we know here to turn into some sort of systems for capturing and changing behavior. Meanwhile, everyone else is like, why would I even talk about gun policy? Because you don't actually believe you can make any progress there. And so, again, that becomes the solution is creating systems of people. Because the thing that then boosts your confidence, most powerful thing in the world, is getting validation from someone that you want to be seen by, that you've just made some progress. There's nothing more reinforcing than that. And so it goes back to like, oh, again, the solution is empowering groups of people so we can restore people's confidence that we can make progress so you can have the hope that's necessary to tackle hard problems and have hard conversations.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to read that study that you're talking about, the monkey study. I read it too. It's like the effort part, and you apply that to training a dog or even training children or, just it's missing.
Totally.
That doesn't happen anymore.
Time for maybe one more question. Thought if anyone has them?
You really touched on some beautiful things, and it just reminded me of some university work. Because my first year was in psychology and neuroscience.
Cool.
And I worked in emergency mental health at a hospital.
Yeah.
So I saw some things, and I worked at stress centers in Canada. So I thought I wanted to go into mental health work, and I decided against it, but it just was really meaningful what you've been through, and I appreciate you being very just heartfelt. And I was wondering if you've ever heard of the Heart Math Institute.
Heart Math Institute or Heart Map?
Heart Math Institute.
No.
Because they talk about, it's kind of a little bit on the alternative health folks, but
Sure.
they've got about 10 years of research, and they're focusing on emotional intelligence.
Beautiful.
Training, and it's kind of interesting. It's called the Heart Math Institute.
Beautiful. I'll check it out. And what work do you do now?
So I do a few things. I'm on a couple think tanks in tech now. But
Awesome. Well, thank you for the years you spent doing that work in mental
I
health.
was at university, a couple placements.
Yeah.
I got some training.
Yeah, I mean, it's intense out there. I was in low-income schools. In 2016, I was the head of a community mental health center and was the only mental health professional at a school where 45% of the folks there were on the poverty line and had Confederate flags in front of their house, while the other 65% were illegal Latino immigrant families. And all of them are below the poverty line. And so there's just a really hard world out there for so many families. And it's a systemic problem, and we need systemic solutions. But in order to actually care about thinking about that, we need people to actually just see some of the pains and then actually try to do something about it. And that's why I go to things like this, because all of us can have an impact. That showing up and being a little bit more present even with just the people on our team, and someone shows up really stressed and talks about something that was hard in their day, and you're just saying like, yeah, that sounds really frustrating, but that matters. You've just increased that person's capacity a little bit. Maybe they have kids at home, so if there was some part of what I explained that touched you, maybe you can feel like you're impacting that a little bit. That we've all sort of forgotten that all of these touch points that we have with each other matter, and the way that we structure, the way that we communicate and collaborate and work matter, because we all have these tendrils that go out to all of these other people that impacts all of these other lives. And so I don't think that the only important work is doing, deep mental health trauma healing. I think, in fact, it's the opposite, that the most important work is choosing to be a leader in whatever space that you're in with any people that you're with. And so, thank you all for that work, and thanks for giving me some time to talk. Totally. Yes. It's Matt Schenker, Schenker. You can hit me up on LinkedIn, website, email, everything is on there.
Before we all head to lunch real quick, I'm not going to say the name of the financial company, but top 5. You had one of the C-suite executives actually at your office when I met with you last time, June 27th. You want to talk to the group a little bit about some of the high-level points that were there?
Yeah, so we have their chief people officer there, and you won't believe